Askreddit by Music and Wine. Serious therapists. What is something people are afraid to tell you because they think it's weird, but that you've actually heard a lot of times before? Attention. Serious tag notice. Jokes, puns, and off-topic comments are not permitted in any comment, parent or child. Parent comments that aren't from the target group will be removed, along with their child replies. Report comments that violate these rules. Posts that have few relevant answers within the first hour, and posts that are not appropriate for the serious tag will be removed. Consider doing an AMA request instead. Thanks for your cooperation and enjoy the discussion. I am a bot, and this action was performed automatically. Please contact the moderators of this subreddit message compose $2 r askreddit if you have any questions or concerns. Intrusive thoughts. Nearly everyone has thoughts about pushing the old lady onto the subway train, swerving into opposing traffic, or stabbing their loved one in the stomach while cooking dinner with them. Some folks, however, take these thoughts very serious that believe that they might act them out. It's called thought-action fusion. Most of us are able to brush them off, though. I felt so ashamed to talk about my intrusive thoughts that got extremely upsetting right after I had my son. Gosh, they were horrible. I thought I was the worst mother ever. Medication really helped, and also just time. The first few months postpartum was so hard. I really wish it was more normal for moms to just automatically have at least 1 or 2 scheduled therapy sessions pp. Just like you have a scheduled follow-up with your OB. I have heard some variant of this is probably weird, but I feel if I am my true self around others then they won't like me more times than I can count. As I explore the formative situations to this belief alongside my clients, it definitely pulls at my heartstrings. The amount of people I see who feel like they should be grieving a certain way and are afraid that they must not have loved someone, or must not have cared. People grieve in all sorts of ways. The 5 stages of grief are bullshit. I was consulting with another clinician who was seeing a couple whose daughter had died. The wife was convinced that the husband must not have cared about her because he wasn't grieving out loud. In reality, while she had been going to support groups and outwardly expressing, he had been continuing to work in a garden that him and his daughter had kept when she was alive, using that time to process and grieve as he did. Both were perfectly fine ways of grieving. However, it is expected that one's grief is more than the other. They both ended up working it out, however, he driving her and others to their weekly support group, her attempting to work in the garden with him on the condition that they didn't talk. Really sweet. To that same extent, the amount of people who are unaware of their own emotions and emotional process is astounding. So many people feel only angry or happy and worry something must be wrong with them otherwise. Normalizing feeling the whole gamut is just as important. Recognizing what we are feeling as well as what it feels like in our body when we are feeling is incredibly helpful for understanding how we process and feel. As a whole, how we treat emotions as a society is kinda fucked. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. Edit, gamut not gambit. My mom yelled at me once for not even caring when my dad left. I turned around, walked out of the house, and it has impacted our relationship to this day. In reality, I was doing my damnedest to hold everything together as in helping with the household needs, supporting her and my sister, and doing a lot of internal work. Just because I'm not very expressive doesn't mean that I don't have feelings, or that I'm not processing. I'd say a common one is believing that there's something innately, irreparably wrong with them that makes them unable to ever truly fit in. For a lot of people it's such a deeply ingrained belief that it can be extremely painful to acknowledge or express, regardless of the level of personal success in their lives. The worst is knowing beyond doubt that you are holding a false belief about yourself and yet not being able to change it. I've spent long enough in therapy trying to figure out what's wrong with me to know there's no there, but the ingrained pattern of thinking doesn't go away. 2 topics come up with regularity: when someone discloses to me that they were sexually abused as a kid, and or when some is experiencing suicidal ideation. Both are something I hear from clients every single day, and so I don't find it weird at all. But when I have someone in front of me who's talking about it for the first time, I know it's important to validate the fact that even though I might be talking about this for like the 5th time that day, they have never talked about this ever, and are in need of gentle care to feel safe. Yes. That validation was life-changing for me. I talked about my early childhood sexual trauma to a few people and counselors to try to process, and was often told that what I went through wasn't that bad or someone else had it worse. It wasn't until a few years ago that our marriage counselor validated my feelings in front of my husband that I truly felt heard and was able to start healing. That they do not know what they enjoy doing. Often they have people in their life, including therapists, say try to do something fun today or ask what do you like to do when you have free time. Many people I work with do not know what those are. Once I explain that I dislike these questions because they assume people should know the answer, and that many people don't, I can watch as they relax, take a deep breath, and say something to the effect of, "Oh my, that's so good to hear. I have no idea what I like to do." That's part of the problem. More often than not they feel like they should know and that everyone else their age has it figured out. They are embarrassed to say that they don't know when in fact not knowing is very common. I couldn't even try to count how many clients I've had this conversation with. That's me. Someone at work once asked me what I do at the weekend and I didn't know any answer. I just shut down. Not knowing how to spend in a meaningful way, as in not regretting it later. A common one in the time I was a therapist was simply "I don't know." You'd be surprised how reluctant people are to admit that they don't know why they're feeling how they are. But that's exactly why you're all were. I'm not a therapist anymore sat there with me, so we can figure out why together. It always put me in mind of a line from America by Simon and Garfunkel. "Kathy, I'm lost," I said, though I knew she was sleeping. "I'm empty and aching and I don't know why." That Simon and Garfunkel line is one of my favorites ever. It's so full of emotion. It's beautiful and sad. Unwanted intrusive thoughts are normal and do not mean you are a bad person. Yes, even intrusions of sexual, religious, moral themes. By definition, these are thoughts that are unwanted. They go against your own values and highlight what you don't want to do. A religious person having unwanted blasphemous images pop into their mind, or a new parent having unwanted sexual thoughts about their new baby. However normal these thoughts are, over 90% of the population, the moral nature of these thoughts mean that often people experience a lot of shame and take many years before they first tell someone about them. Edit. Because this is getting more visibility that I realized, the occurrence of these thoughts, images, urges are normal. The best way to manage them is to accept that they are a normal, albeit unpleasant, brain process, and a sign of the opposite of who you are and are therefore very unlikely to ever do. Let the thought run its course in the background while you bring your attention back to insert something you can see, feel, hear, taste, touch. I usually say something like, "Okay mind. Thanks for that mind. I'm going to get back to washing the dishes," and the sound sensation of the water while you ponder all the nasties. Carry on. I literally say it to myself with a slightly amused tone. I am always genuinely amused at all the wild stuff my brain can produce. With my last baby, I would suddenly think to myself, what if I just drop her on the floor? Was horrified for a bit before I realized it was normal. So every time I would think about something like that, I would complete the thought. What if I drop the baby? Baby could die. I would go to jail. That would really suck. Let's not drop the baby. I didn't think this comment would be seen by many. It was a quickly written response. In order of importance, the first thing that would be horribly wrong with dropping my child is that she could die. That would be the worst. But then there is also the possibility of jail, which was why it was second. So for everyone thinking that my biggest concern is jail, it's not. Psychologist here. Basically, anything having to do with sex. There's so much shame. Sexual abuse. Sexual fantasies and fetishes. Erectile dysfunction. Infidelity. becoming sexually assertive. I've been told that I have a good psychologist's face. I try not to have a strong reaction to normalize the discussion. With adolescents, they are extremely anxious to tell me if they've relapsed or aren't doing well. They cut one night or they were suicidal. They're having a lot of negative self-talk or panic attacks. They'll come in, pretending everything is okay. It's usually in the last 10-15 minutes that they'll say something. They'll reveal that they worried they'd let me down. That I'd be disappointed in them. It usually turns into a discussion about policing other people's feelings and tolerating emotions. I explain that I care about their well-being and it's my job to monitor my emotions and reactions, not their role. Those last 15 minutes of a session are when I spew out all the best stuff to my therapist. And then I feel a negative emotion that I brought it up at the end and can't finish talking about it. That they don't like their family members, are angry, want to stop communication with their parents, etc. I work in a country which is more culturally collectivist, so not wanting anything to do with your parents makes you an asshole in the current cultural sense. We deal with this almost on a daily basis. There is deep and profound shame in this, and when we find that line of "oh, it might be that your parents are toxic to your mental well-being, trigger your trauma," many of my clients actually get visibly angry with me. Cultural psychology is so important, cause when I first moved here I had my American European hat on. Oh boy, did I need to adjust. Edit, I'm in Ukraine. Clients become quite fearful of admitting that they weren't successful since the last time they had a session. This could include not succeeding in using a coping skill that they're learning about, or not being able to complete a homework assignment I gave them. Humans aren't robots, and therapy is a lot of work. That being said, I don't expect people to be perfect as they start to work on themselves in a positive way. It takes time to really commit to change, especially in relation to trauma or conflicted views that an individual holds. I feel as if the client doesn't want to let me down as their therapist, but these failure events are just as important to talk about as successful moments. I had to learn this lesson as a client. I suffer with ADHD and struggled immensely with starting and completing my graduate work when I was getting my master's, to the point of sometimes making no progress and not completing any work and putting my student status in jeopardy. My therapist had an idea for me to text him at the end of each day to let him know what I had gotten done, as a way of holding myself accountable to someone else. However, I struggled to even do that, and after 2 days, stopped texting him because I still wasn't completing any work and was too embarrassed to tell him. When I came in for my session the following week, I very clearly looked embarrassed and couldn't properly look him in the eye. He said, "Dude, you're coming in here looking like you just killed someone or something. It's okay. You're going to make progress, and it's okay if you're not successful at first. It's all a part of learning to improve. You don't need to be scared or embarrassed if you don't succeed the first time. If you don't complete any work, just tell me. I'm not going to be mad at you. I'm here to encourage you and help you manage yourself better." It really helped to hear that, because I put so much pressure on myself even though my ability to do things normally is compromised. I still see the same therapist. He's great and has helped me improve a lot since then. Women often feel really ashamed when they tell me they are burned out on being a parent or that they never want to have kids. I wish all of them knew how common this thought is. My best friend is a mid-30s woman with 3 young boys, one with nonverbal autism and one extraordinarily gifted. During the pandemic, she loves her boys and so do I, but she wants to take a real long break from them, and I don't blame her. Her job as a mother during all this sounds immensely challenging. Hypersexuality after some sort of sexual trauma. Some of the most common ones have been visual and/or auditory hallucinations and suicidal thoughts. I usually hear "I don't want to be put in the hospital" or "I don't want you to think I'm crazy." Also, basically anything sexual. I'm not going to judge you for being into BDSM, fetishes, etc. Honestly, I've probably heard it before and I'm not here to judge you. Same goes with any non-consensual experiences, especially if we're working through trauma. Every time I meet with a therapist for the first time, I tell them I've had suicidal ideation almost non-stop since I was a kid, and that it's normal for me. The first time I got hospitalized, it was because I told someone I was having suicidal thoughts and they called the cops. The whole scenario was traumatic and I'm terrified of it happening again. If I have any thought a therapist might try to hospitalize me because I'm having suicidal thoughts, which, again, are normal for me, then I can't trust them enough to be my therapist. It took me a long time to be comfortable saying it out loud without fear of hospitalization. Psychologist in the US. To name a few. Compulsive masturbation. Fears of being a pedophile rapist. This is a common OCD fear. Hoarding. Sexual performance difficulties. History of sexual abuse or sexual assault. Unfortunately it is very common. Drug use. Amount of money spent on various things. Having an ASD diagnosis. Going back to an abusive relationship. Staying in an abusive relationship. Grieving years and years after a loss. Self-harm of all sorts. Wanting to abandon their current lifestyle. For example, to have more sex. To escape responsibility or expectations. History of gang violence, crime. Their sexuality or asexuality. Gender identity. The impact of racism, racial trauma. Paranoia. Hallucinations. Feeling uncomfortable in therapy. Not believing in therapy. Difficulty trusting a therapist. Fear of psychiatric medication. Fear of doctors in general. I was surprised to see suicidal ideation on others' responses. Most of my clients seem to talk very openly about suicidal thoughts and urges from the start of therapy, which I think is super healthy. I think that most of the people I've worked with had SI, current or history. As weird as it may seem, I can't imagine what a life without any thoughts about suicide would even look like. At this point, I don't recall a time a patient said something in therapy and I was shocked or even thought, oh, that's new. And if you surprise your therapist, that is okay. I wonder if we askreddit, what are you afraid to tell anyone, even a therapist, because you think it is weird? How many people would see that they aren't that weird at all? I was seeing my therapist, who I think is great and was super comfortable with, for depression and anxiety, and I still never told her about my suicidal thoughts because in my mind that would totally change things and it'd get serious. Usually it's sex related. Shame about their desires or kinks is common. Gender questioning is another. Some people are ashamed of things they did in childhood or adolescence, haven't ever told anyone and think the team will be horrified. We have heard everything. Everything. I'm always compassionate and always understand why we do the things we do. I've yet to have anyone bring something I can't get. What would you consider a healthy way to deal with past actions we are ashamed of? A lot, and I mean a lot, of people who experienced sexual abuse feel very guilty for a myriad of reasons that are not their fault. 1. Guilty for attracting the attention. 2. Guilty for not speaking up. 3. Guilty for enjoying being seen by someone. 4. Guilty for having any sort of pleasure from their abuse. All those feelings are common and addressed in therapy. But it is so hard for people to discuss it. Many of my clients live through severe childhood trauma and neglect. They had no one to model or explain healthy emotions or to show them appropriate ways to react to stress, fear, anger, etc. Most often they'll describe a completely normal reaction to a stressor and then follow that up with, I don't know if that's normal. These are adults who were exposed to so much dysfunction during their formative years that they don't know whether it's normal to cry when they are anxious or afraid, feel angry when their boundaries have been violated, etc.